Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our October Bicep community call. What is the community call for? I go over these every month. I'm going to go over it again. It's for you guys, not for us. This is to give a more casual connection with our community, allow you guys to talk to us, and allow us to give you as many updates as possible instead of waiting twice a year for updates as we used to have. Please use the chat. We have all of our engineers here. They're here to answer any of your questions. You can also raise your hand to talk to us directly. Okay, on to our O.23 release. We have supplemental and inline parameters available for this release. This is something that one of our engineers, Mohammed, has been working on for a while, and we're really excited about because I know that a lot of our users have been wanting this feature. This will only be available in the Bicep CLI for this release. So to use it in the Azure CLI and PowerShell, you'll have to wait until November 17th when those versions get released. Because of this, we'll save the demo for the next community call, and documentation on using this feature will also go out later this month. Compile time imports of user-defined functions is also out with this release under an experimental flag still. Our engineer, Johnny, has been working really hard on compile time imports, so now we support types, variables, and user-defined functions. Last, decorators are now allowed on nested child resources. One of our core maintainers worked on this, and we're really appreciative of all the help that our users have been giving us. So thanks, Mikolai. In this picture is an example of how it's used in a nested child resource. You could go to the issue as well to get a little bit more information. Future releases, O.24 and O.25. There's not too much here because we're still working on smaller features here and there, but modular parameters should be available next release, and Engen will talk a little bit more about that and talk about the design as well. All right, on to our first demo. We have some really good demos today, so that's what I'd like to take most of this community call doing. Last month, our users had asked about Azure Verified modules to see if there's someone on the team that could come and talk about this. So we have the AVM team to give a presentation on this. So AVM team, do you want to take over?
If you wouldn't mind driving, Stephanie, that would be fantastic because I'm actually on vacation today, so I've joined especially for this whilst on vacation. So I don't have my laptop quite ready and working. I've literally just arrived. So if you don't mind driving, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you wouldn't mind skipping to the next slide, that would be fantastic. So firstly, thanks all to everybody for asking for the AVM team to be here and come and talk a little bit around what Azure Verified Modules is. I'm just going to give you a really brief overview in sort of 5 minutes of what the program's around and why we're doing this. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Alexander, to talk a little bit about how you can actually learn more, get involved and see what we've been up to already. So what we have noticed over the many years that infrastructure as code and DevOps has been growing in popularity is that we have this sort of journey that we're showing on the screen here. So typically our customers will start with portal-based deployments and ClickOps, as we would deem that, deployments, and then they might get a bit more mature and going, hey, how can we make this a little bit better? How can we get it more consistent? And they start adopting basic infrastructure as code and DevOps practices. And then, naturally, you have a lot of proliferation of code, lots of things that are repeated because it grows and grows and grows over time. And then you go, well, hold on, we're now at a good level, but how do we try and consolidate some of this? How do we make it more maintainable for ourselves? How do we, really don't repeat ourselves is effectively the question there. So customers go looking for infrastructure as code open source repositories, and they find that there's many repositories out there on the internet, right? And many from Microsoft as well, all with differing standards, different naming structures, different principles they align to. So you're left in a bit of a, hey, how do I pick the right one? What one do I choose? And being honest, you probably would pick one blindly, right? You would just go, hey, that one looks good enough for us. That has what we need. It has the resources we want. off we go. And then unfortunately, what you may find, and we've seen this unfortunately with a couple of sort of repos that live within the Azure org and Microsoft organizations, that some of them might be abandoned over time because actually they might not be funded, or things change, people move on, change roles, all of those sort of things, and the project becomes stale, right, and effectively archived by itself, and you're left there as a customer going, hey, I was using this, this is what I wanted, but now I can't do anything, right? I'm stuck, right? I'm going to have to take a copy of this myself, go forward, and you're effectively feel dissatisfied and disheartened by, hey, we've been left in the lurch a little bit here. We've committed to a project, but now it's fallen away from underneath us, and now we've got to start again. So we've obviously been in the field and seen this happen a lot. And what we're trying to do with the Azure Verified Modules initiative is bring in this new idea and new approach that these will be long-term supported, and these will be the source of truth for infrastructure as code modules in both Bicep and Terraform today, for the long time, right? So these will be long-term maintained. There'll be a clear process around how they're supported, how they may become orphaned, and how they can be picked back up by other people, and how they get supported whilst they're in those orphaned states while they don't have owners. So if you wouldn't mind skipping to the next one, Stephanie. So our mission, with the help of our favorite AI tooling, it would be fair to say, is to deliver a comprehensive module library in multiple infrastructure as code languages, as I mentioned today, Bicep and Terraform, following the principles of the well-architected framework, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, that serve as the trusted source of truth from Microsoft. They'll be supported by Microsoft, so customer support, as well as engineering and the AVM core team and many other teams within Microsoft. We'll standardize and accelerate the deployment of Azure resources and architectural patterns, which is something else we've introduced, that empowers everybody on their infrastructure as code journey. So quite a bold, high-level statement, but hopefully that aligns with a lot of you. If you'd like to skip to the next one, what would be Stephanie? So any of you who have seen or used the Carmel project today, or the Common Azure Resource Module Library project today, you'll definitely know a few faces on the call today, mainly Alexander and Erica and Raina, who are here from that team. This is absolutely being the Bicep version of AVM is effectively an evolution of Carmel, right? So the same people are involved, the same team are involved, and you'll notice the common resource modules in here on the diagram on the right hand side, that is effectively an evolution of Carmel modules into AVM. But what we're then also adding is this other module classification of patterns. So grouping together groups of resource modules to build common patterns. So you might choose to build a pattern that's a 3-tier web app architecture with a database. You might choose to have a pattern that's part of the Azure landing zones architecture. You might choose to have a pattern that's part of the Azure Virtual Desktop or AKS landing zone accelerators. But really, anything could be a pattern, but they're built upon and from those resource modules that give a consistent way to interact and deploy resources that are secure by default, aligning to our well-architected framework. So where there are options to make things, non-publicly accessible, they'll be defaulted in the modules, but you'll have the options to override those. TLS versions will be set to the higher standards as per default, but they can be lowered via parameters. And we're really taking all of that hard work out of the way, to just talk about how or to think about how to deploy those resources. Also implementing some of the common extension resources that we see, like diagnostic settings, locks, tags, private endpoints, customer managed keys, in a consistent way and a consistent schema using user-defined types, which we've already worked out for Bicep, for all of those things, so that when you use a resource module, you interact with those extension resources for that resource, a virtual machine, a storage account, a virtual network, in the same way across all of those resources, regardless of how the underlying API actually works. Customer managed keys is a great example of this. Customer managed keys enablement per service is very different, and there's no standard pattern. So it can be frustrating as a developer of infrastructure as code modules to go, oh, I've got customer managed keys working for this service over here, but now it's a different schema and different things are required over here. we can, as the AVM team, can provide sort of an abstraction layer over top or a shim over the top that takes in the same inputs always, and will do the data manipulation and working out and getting the right resources to pass to the underlying RPs, so that you as developers can learn the AVM as a sort of a shim language over the top. But most of the time it will be native Bicep. We're just helping you accelerate faster in the points that we know are painful. Next slide, please, Stephanie. So all of this is publicly documented and it's available on the link above. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Alex, to talk a little bit more around how you can get involved and see what we've been up to today.
Thank you very much, Jack. Stephanie, if you don't mind, I would just quickly take over the screen sharing just for a few minutes. If you could let me know if you can see anything, that would be marvelous.
All good. We can see it.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, I'm gonna try to put a face essentially to everything that Jack just talked about, in the sense of showing a little bit about the AVM website and also the modules that we've been working on. First and foremost, you can see the link here and was also already shared in the previous screen sharing. So the landing page is essentially aks.ms/avm, and you can find quite a lot of stuff in here. So instead of just going through the slides, it makes you jump over to the website in dark mode, you know. But anyways, so there are a few things here just to quickly point out. Go to that website. The first thing that you will see on top are module indexes, both for Bicep and Terraform, as you try to essentially develop those modules side by side for either resource provider, trying to align also on with the features that are implemented and so on and so forth, though obviously in this call be primarily focused now on the Bicep part. Something else to point out is that there is a section about specifications and definitions where we defined essentially what an AVM module should look like. So what the specs are that we, for example, test for, and we would expect the module to look like, just to give an impression of what that could mean, is, for example, for the interfaces, Jack just pointed out customer managed keys, but there are quite a few, such as, I don't know, let's say private endpoint, for example. If I expand one here, it essentially suggests that for private endpoint deployment, if a module supports it, please add this user-defined type with all this metadata in there, how this should look like. Here's how the parameter should look like, and here's how the deployment should look like, using an already published private endpoint module that is already in the public registry today, just simply to standardize stuff. And one of the things that we can do there, for example, is to provide a default value for the service that you would need to provide. So for a keyboard, that would, I think, be Vault, for example, next to other things, but it should provide a consistent usage experience. So this is about the specs. Again, we have quite a lot of those. Don't have enough time to talk through all of them, unfortunately. The other thing is the contribution. So there's a whole flow essentially similar to what is in the public registry today, for example, about you can propose a module, you can volunteer as an owner for a module. That means as somebody who would respond if there are issues, who makes sure that the module stays up to date, and so on and so forth. And then there's a whole, for Bicep, for example, in this case, a whole flow described how the contribution flow would look like, specifically how you could set up the CI environment that we use to validate. Again, very similar to the public registry in a sense of running static validation to make sure the module is compliant with the specification, running, in our case, PS rule, for example, to test the buff alignment, for example, in general, the best practices that PS rule suggests. But also the deployment tests to ultimately decide, okay, if something actually works when we deploy to Azure. So if I go, for example, now into the resource modules here, being as opposed to the patterns, which are this composition of modules, you can already see a module catalog here. These are all the modules that are already published right now. It's a wild mix, like cognitive services, for example, action groups, keyboards, and so on and so forth. The reasoning being here, some of them like keyboard, let's say NIC or public IPs are pretty fundamental, and others like cognitive services where we wanted to test all those user-defined types with. So I was working on this one because it has essentially all those extension resources. So this is already there. These modules are already available and have an owner in this case. If they have this green mark here, some of them you can see, however, are orphaned, which essentially just means no module owner picked them up yet. They are already published. That doesn't mean nobody reacts to anything. It just essentially means that it falls back now on the core team to support those modules. We cannot do the same that the module owner would do, but we want to make sure that if there are issues that we can, that we are aware of them, resolve them, for example. And then there's a whole list of planned modules. And if I expand this one, you will see, well, most of them say essentially migrate this from Camo. Jack already mentioned this. You may know the Camo library. It's very similar to what we tried to do here. Has been around for now, I think, a little bit more than 2 years. And we have a rich library there of, I think, 115-ish top-level modules, meaning like Key Vault, Virtual Network, and so on and so forth, which we want to migrate over, which is an effort of, well, aligning them essentially with the specs that we defined before publishing them actually to the public registry. Which then neatly brings me over. If I were to click, for example, on cognitive services here, this would now bring us then into the AVM folder of the public registry. That's where it is right now. We are still working out some things in the background here, but just to get going and not stall, we essentially started with that. We have essentially an AVM folder here with a REST folder underneath, and so on and so forth. And then you can find essentially the default structure, like a main.bicep, main.json, a README, which has then usage examples, how you can use stuff. It has all user-defined types defined in here, how you deploy this, for example, via a Bicep way, via a JSON way, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, I know I'm probably running out of time, but I just at least wanted to show this. I hope this works right now. We can then already use, for example, the public registry modules to date. So I just had cognitive services, for example, out here. So if I were now to reference it actually from the public registry, I can now actually go in here, get the required parameters in here, right? But also already use then user-defined types, which we didn't have in Camo yet, which meant, for example, role assignments were just an abstract array. You would need to look at an example how this actually looks like in the modules. And now with user-defined types, we can actually get the full experience in, which is actually kind of neat. And with that, yeah, I would hand over. I think the next one is Shenglong, or I'll hand back to you, Stephanie. If there are any questions, obviously, we will still be around in the chat. But yeah, thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, Alexander. Thanks, Jack. Really appreciate it. Let me reshare my screen.
Stephanie, do we have time to take some questions live?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's just a lot of discussion. I figured it might be good to get some of it on the recording as well.
Absolutely, yes.
I don't know, Jack, if there were any in particular you wanted to highlight and discuss, or do you feel like everything's been answered?
I think most things have been covered, but definitely for the recording, I think we'll cover a few of those pieces. So I think one that I'm just in the middle of replying to is around contributions, like who can contribute, who can build and own AVM modules, right? Because today the limitation on the Bicep registry modules repo is that it has to be Microsoft FTEs. Now, unfortunately, that remains for AVM initially. However, let me give some context to that. So to provide the support and the long-term maintainability of these modules that I think everybody would want from us as Microsoft, we have to have a mechanism of chasing people effectively when things aren't done, right? So when module issues aren't replied to, or bugs are raised and not responded to or resolved, we need people to be able to, step up and be accountable for those things. So AVM actually brings a set of rules for module owners that we enforce, effectively saying, hey, you're not doing this, you're going to get a 3 strikes rule, and then the module will become orphaned and we'll find new people to maintain it. And when that happens, certain things like security and bugs, the AVM core team will step in to try and resolve those issues whilst they're in an orphaned state. Obviously, new feature additions will probably unlikely to be happen if we have spare cycles, definitely, but we'll be focusing on making sure those securities and bugs that have been raised are resolved. Now, to be able to do that, we need to be able to chase people, and obviously being internal FTEs, we have the luxury of being able to message people directly internally and find mechanisms of getting hold of people. If people externally were to be module owners, we wouldn't have that same luxury, unfortunately, today, to be able to get hold of people and check to that. But what we do want to promote is that just because you're not the module owner doesn't mean you cannot contribute to the module. So if you know friends and colleagues that work inside of Microsoft, you can work with them to say, hey, would you be up for owning the module and taking the internal responsibilities on board? But actually, we, external contributors, MVPs, anybody in the community can actually contribute towards those modules via PRs, and that will effectively be the way that people in the community can get involved to help out, build out this library, add features, and improve AVM in that way. So it's not a complete locked door, but we would need an FTE to be the owner of a module today. I think it's something we would love to remove in the future, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done and a lot of process that needs to be thought about to make sure we have that high support bar and quality bar and maintainability. So that's a quick summary on that. I don't know if anybody's got any further points on that, or anybody wants to add anything to that one.
So I was just going to say, I'll just raise my hand on that one. With the way that we're doing things in some of the PowerShell community, we're having like group owners. So there's Microsoft that's got the core ownership, but there's also the community that's in as well. And the .NET team do something similar for some of those as well. So it might be something that could be done as a more of a group method, as opposed to it being a primary person.
Yeah, and I think we definitely have that
requirement for a Microsoft FTE.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is, we don't mind there being groups of people. We would need to change some of our internal processes. Like, we would love there always to be more than one person owning the module, because resiliency, load balance, and all of those good things. But we don't want to mandate today, whilst we're still getting AVM off the ground, to be fair, to say that there has to be 2 of you or there has to be 3 of you. I think that's something that, as it evolves, will definitely start to turn up the bar and the group, and then that may change who can own the module. Like, it may be that as long as one FTE is in that group, then fine, it can have other people from outside. As I say, it's something we would love to work on, I think, and from speaking to both the Terraform product group and the Bicep product team here, it's something that we all would love to unblock in the future. And it is truly open source, as Rainer has pointed out, but we need to work out the process and how we maintain all of those things, like supportability, maintainability, upkeep, and all of those things. So believe me, it's something we want to fix, but we want to first of all get the library out there so that people can start consuming it, and then we can work on making it even better. So that's that one. I think as for the others, I think we might have covered most of them in the chat. If anybody does have any questions that they feel like are unanswered, please do feel free to put up your hand and come off mute, or let us know in the chat and somebody can read those out. But we would love to see that. Anything else for anybody else? Alex, Alex F, anything from you? I have to be careful with the Alexes.
No. I'm excited to see progress here, and to see how the community starts consuming these. We know Carmel has been pretty popular as kind of like almost like a skunkworks project, right? So to see it kind of get into more of some of the mainstream experiences is really great. And we definitely need all of your feedback to make it as good as it can be.
Yeah, and I suppose one last ask from me would be, if there's could we get a quick thumbs up from everybody if they would like to start using AVM and they would be interested in consuming it and potentially contributing towards it, or is this something that you're like, we're never going to get involved? Okay, that's a pretty much a telling sign. There was quite a few thumbs up there, so that's great to see that we're on the right thing. I think we're going to try and be a bit more present on these community calls, so hopefully you'll see us at least every other month, but if not, hopefully every month. And if you want to get in touch with us in the meantime, feel free to hit up the repo and raise GitHub issues, and we will reply to them. Probably the easiest way of getting hold of us on there. So please raise a GitHub issue on the AVM repo. I did see the one around the timeline for getting Carmel modules to into AVM. That is something we're currently working on. And it is answered in our frequently asked questions, because we figured that would be something that a lot of people would be interested in. Our current sort of like finger in the air, not to be held accountable for, is we're hoping that some point towards the end of the calendar year, we'll have the good majority of them done. But that depends on the current, we're going for a decentralized ownership model, as you may have picked up. for the AVM modules, so that there'll be lots of people owning their own modules and being enforced by the standards that AVM imposes. So as long as we've got a lot of those still module owners there to help us do the migration, it will go faster. If not, we'll have to obviously be a little bit slower, but we can provide updates on that as we go forward on maybe the next couple of months calls. But that's our current intent, is try and get there by the end of the calendar year, but it may slip. All right, if nothing else, I'm conscious we've taken a good chunk of the community call. Thanks again for having us. We'll hand back to you, Stephanie and Alex, to take us forward for the next interesting topics.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate your time and coming here and taking the time out of your vacation as well to talk to us. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our next topic. Shenglong, you want to talk about the Hackathon project?
Yeah, sure. Let me start sharing.
Okay.
And let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. So today I want to spend 5 minutes talking about the Hackathon project that I've been working on. The Hackathon project is called Bicep Visual Editor. A little background. The project has a simple objective, that is to convert the current Bicep visualizer into a user-friendly visual editor that will eventually allows you to do resource creation through drag and drop, as well as additional resource operations through a context menu. And lastly, the other thing that I want to add is properties UI, which will enable users to do resource editing through some UI controls instead of rather than modifying the Bicep code. The reason why I started this project is that I find it to be a very interesting personal project that has some customer value. If this is published, it will make Bicep code editing effortless, and I think it will lower the bar for new users to learn Bicep. And on the other hand, personally, I feel like it's time for me to refresh and expand my front-end development knowledge and skills, since it's been a few years since last time I worked on a front-end project. So some of the challenges that I found while I was working on this project include that the current visualizer uses a library called cytoscape.js to render the resource graph. However, that library is purely SVG based, which is not very extensible. So if I want to customize it, it's very, very hard. So I try to find other like HTML element-based graph rendering library. Turns out there are a bunch of them, but only one of them satisfies our need. But that library, unfortunately, has it is open source, but by default, you will add an attribution to the graph canvas, and if you want to remove that, the author suggests that we subscribe to their plan. So it's not free, although it's under a MIT license. So I guess in the end, I decided to just build my own graph rendering library to support this Hackathon project. The other challenge that I found is that since the project involves several individual React apps, and those apps will need to be running inside VS Code web views, I find it very hard to do debugging and testing, because every time I need to test the changes, I have to launch VS Code and use VS Code's developer tools to do debugging. So that slows the development process down. So the thing that the changes that I made to the VS Code file structure makes it possible for me to
Thanks,
Back to you,
Shalom.
Stephanie.
Thank you. Oh, we have one question. Will the visual editor be portable to be used in the Bicep playground?
Good question. Potentially, since the playground is also a React app, we can probably investigate.
Sounds good. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on. Modular parameters with Engin. Hopefully you'll have enough time to present this.
Yes. Hi all. And Stephanie, I will need your help to go through the slides. I will give you a
Okay,
clue.
absolutely.
I'd like to share our design proposal for this new feature called Modular Parameters. And next slide, please. Let me step back and talk about the need first. We noticed a recurring pattern of large configuration files for deployments in many customers. And by configuration files, I mean Bicep param files. So Bicep files have the context for deployments, and Bicep param files have the configuration. So you can update Bicep param files and configure your deployments. And in most projects, we split deployments in separate files based on the team that maintains the resources, or based on how we structured the project, like the parts of the project, things like that. And almost all of these deployments have some common parameters in Bicep param files, like the name of the resource group, or the location of the deployment, like name of the key vault, or the storage account, or the log analytics namespace, that's used in the deployments, things like that. And those deployments have separate configurations, Bicep param files, and we have to define those common parameters in all of the Bicep param files. If we could split Bicep param files in a way, we could improve the usability of the configuration for the deployments. So Modular Parameters feature tends to improve the usability of the Bicep param files by allowing developers to put common parameters in a single file. And next slide, please. It could also help developers to have an entry point Bicep param file with some parameters defined in it, and also environment-specific Bicep param file that can be imported into the entry point, or the main, however you name it. For example, we can have a different number of nodes for a Kubernetes cluster, like in different environments, like dev and prod, right? And again, modular parameters help you to split parameters in different files, like Lego pieces, and allow you to mix and match them and build the right configuration for your deployment. And that's good. And next slide, please. So when we work on this proposal, we took these considerations into our design. Parameters are going to be exported by default. No need to decorate parameters to export them explicitly. So you can use the existing parameter files and they will just work. You can import more than one Bicep param file into the main Bicep param. So you can have, let's say, like layers in your folder structure, and you can import parameters from these layers. Next consideration is basically you import subset of parameters from a Bicep param file. So even if you have more than enough parameters defined in a file, you can import only the required ones into your configuration context. And the last one is to be able to use read environment variable function to resolve the correct Bicep param file path. So we can use the correct values for parameters based on the target environment, for example. Next slide, please. So the proposed syntax is relatively simple and also familiar. We'd like to use the same syntax that we already have, to import like modules from Bicep registries, for example, right? So syntax is import list of parameters that will be added into the configuration context from and the path of the Bicep param file. And I'd like to talk briefly about the usage scenarios as well. Next slide, please. In the first scenario, we can see there are two Bicep param files, shared and module specific. And in the main bicep param, we import subset of parameters from those files and add some more parameters into the mix. And voila, configuration that's used in the deployment has the correct parameters now. Next slide, please. Yes, in the second scenario, we import 2 out of 3 parameters from a file, but we give alias to one of the parameters. So basically, we renamed that specific parameter. And again, our deployment has the correct parameters now. And next slide, please. Next scenario, we can have some environment variables, probably set by the orchestrator, like GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps pipelines. And in our main bicep param file, we import parameters from the environment-specific bicep param file. And in this case, we use read environment variable function to resolve the correct bicep param file path based on the value of an environment variable like env in this case. And so in this scenario, the resolved bicep param file will be under the global folder. The name of the bicep param file will be dev.bicepparam. And the next slide, please. Yes, in our last scenario, we can import more than 1 bicep param files. Even we could have some parameters defined in the root of the main bicep param, and the deployment will have the combination of all of the parameters. And there's like one last slide. Yes, quick note here. Types of the parameters will be preserved. So if you need a location parameter in your deployment, for example, and the location parameter in a separate file is not in the correct type, then the deployment fail as expected, because the types should be, like match. And also, auto of the bicep param file should resolve name clashes. Like if a name used in a different bicep param file, if in different bicep param files for different parameters, and you have to import them, you should give alias, at least one of them, to avoid name conflicts. Otherwise, editor will point the conflict, and also there will be an error in the output if you use the CLI. Final note could be we have the design proposal up on GitHub in this issue 12.019. Any comment or feedback will be more than welcome. And yep, that's basically it.
Thanks, Enkin. Do we have any questions? Anyone can unmute themselves and ask directly as well.
Sure.
Let's see if there's anything in chat that we might have
Enkin,
missed.
do you mind sharing that link in the chat as well?
Yes, I could do that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Second,
I don't know if I have a question, but I just want to say thank you. This is so needed.
Thank you.
And so the idea is that in the example you were showing, that first param file, if you could show the example where you had the secret.
Yep.
Which one?
Right.
Did you say scenario 1?
Scenario
yeah,
1.
right here.
Okay.
So the idea here is that the first section, that these really, these you wouldn't want stored in source control, right? Because they contain, or at least the second one you wouldn't want to be keeping that password in source control. So maybe you're, as part of a workflow, maybe you're pulling these values from a key vault, right? You're generating, so you'd want some way of like generating that that shared bicep param file that can then be read in from the execution of the module. Does that make sense?
Yep. This is like a relatively simple example. So the like real world scenarios could use like key vaults or other mechanisms to like get secure or confidential like values for certain parameters.
So this modular parameters plan, will it also read in normal JSON files? Because I know how to generate a JSON file that as part of a workflow, but the Bicep param files, I guess it wouldn't be too hard to just generate one of those on the fly after having read in values from a key vault.
Actually, you don't have to generate a JSON file with a value from a key vault. There is already like baked in feature. You can like reference a key vault secret to your parameter
From the command line.
And actually there's a like Bicep function called get secret, if I remember correctly. Like you can use this like get secret function, and you pass the resource group name, key vault name, and the secret name. If you want to pin it to a specific version, you can also give the secret version as well. And in the like deploy time, ARM backend will resolve the value for you.
We might be storing it like in a different key vault though. Like that's not a Microsoft key vault. What if it's stored like a third-party key vault?
I might suggest we table the discussion because this is more about how to manage passwords, less about the inheritance of parameters. There are a host of features around kind of having passwords in an environment variable or in a key vault, either in this deployment or another deployment for pulling in the password. And we're happy to continue the discussion offline.
Perfect.
Is the issue a good place to continue that discussion?
What's that with?
Is the linked issue a good place to continue that discussion?
The linked
or just
issue?
a different? Yeah, I guess he linked an issue to what 12.019. Is that
Engin's issue for feedback? That feels like a good place for me to have that discussion.
Cool.
Perfect.
Let me find that link and share it. Okay. Was that all? I think I saw another hand, but it was put down.
Yeah, I had one last question. User-defined types, those will work across the shared Bicep param files? Like if you inherit a user-defined type that's backed as a parameter?
It's a good question. It should be. It should be. Yes, it should be.
Cool. Excellent.
Yep. Thank you.
I did have one question, Engin, around, is there going to be, or is there a reason we explicitly don't want to allow importing all the parameters from a file with like an asterisk?
Yeah, a great question. So importing everything from a separate file could be dangerous, since you have to provide only the parameters exist in the deployment, and that separate file could be updated and have new parameters for a totally different deployment. And this could make the deployments that has like everything syntax, like the star syntax, fail. So we'd like to have a conservative approach here to make sure if the deployment can be made with the current content of the file, it's still be made even if you add new parameters into the other file, But we are thinking to add some features into the VS Code extension, so authors of the Bicep param file will get the list of the parameters that can be imported easily, and you just like hit tab, and then it will fill out all the parameters. If you want to import like everything from a file, and even the GitHub Copilot will help you to fill out like all the parameter names for you.
Makes sense.
So,
yeah. Although what you said, this is my 10-cent contribution, right? I believe that there will be a scenario where we'll have a large number of parameters maybe that we are using, right? And in this case, maybe should be interesting to consider the user of star here, even it gives you errors during the transpilation process or so on, right? Just as shortcut, although it's not indicated, right? That shortcut would help in case of having lots of parameters, right? We have some cases that we do have it. So just a suggestion for the approach.
Perfect. Thank you.
We do import on an index of the array of parameters. So like say you've got 20 parameters in that file, you do an import of just a number 20, and you expect that to be the 20 that you need.
So I could
not happen.
what was the question? Sorry.
I'll find an issue and put what I mean down in words.
That sounds good,
Okay.
Ryan.
Thank you. And yeah,
Any
if that's
other
all,
questions?
back to you, Stephanie.
Yeah. Oh, there's another question. What about adding a secondary filter so we can import a shared params and just select what we want?
So, like the idea of like if I had 2 or 3 things I was having to import from to grab everything, I could grab those, but then I'd be able to just select out what was actually required for my deployment. Because I've seen a client, they put every possible parameter into one file for say 3 or 4 different deployment types, and that's how they want to keep it. They keep all the environment together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Greg,
I see what you mean.
Do you mind putting that proposal in the issue, just the kind of the syntax you're thinking?
Yeah, I'll write that up.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. We have less than 10 minutes, so we can move on. Thanks, Engin. Really appreciate it. And I put the link in chat if anyone wants to put any feedback or any questions. Okay, on to you, Alex.
Cool. So I'm just going to run through the requested updates quickly. So the first one around compile time imports, I think the question was around when would it leave experimental? I don't know if we have an exact ETA yet, but I think it's relatively close. I think it's on the order of a few months, not longer than that. Anthony or Johnny, I don't know if you're, oh, Johnny's on the call. If we have a particular estimate, or Stephanie, if we know if we have a particular estimate.
And I think here, Johnny, correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the goals is really to make sure that we're not making any bad decisions. And so collecting as much feedback as possible before we make the decision to GA it is important here.
Right, and just because the syntax is the same, it's a little bit tied to the modular parameters feature Engin was just describing. So we want to make sure the syntax is useful in both of those cases, and we don't need to make any changes.
Yeah, so that was the other piece. Is I think Stan asked if there was any other features that'll be added. So Engin covered the last critical feature before we can take it out of experimental, but it's also pending feedback, like Johnny and Anthony were saying.
Do we have any documentation to share, by the way, for how to test it out and take it for a spin? Because I think it would be helpful for people on this call to try it out and give feedback.
I don't know if we have any documentation yet. Stephanie, is there anything that you're aware of?
Let me look into it really quickly. But if not, then we could get started on that soon.
Great. The second one, the max literal character limit for low text content. So there's what seems to be basically an arbitrary limit on importing large files with the low text content function. So there's an ask essentially like, what's the plan? Do we have ETAs or do we need to find workarounds? The short answer is we tried to prioritize it for the current semester of work, which just started, and we just couldn't justify it based on our other priorities. So it's going to stay as is for likely the next 3 to 6 months. So you do need to find workarounds in the meantime. We agree that it's a problem. We definitely want to fix it. I think it's tagged for 1.0, so we will get to it, but nothing, no particular ETA. The third one, the Bicep testing framework. So if you were around for the last few community calls, you've seen updates on this testing framework. It was our intern project for the summer. Again, this is one where we don't have the bandwidth right now to continue to work on the Bicep testing framework, but we do think that there's a lot of promise there. And if you've seen the recent Terraform 1.6 that they talked about at HashiConf a couple weeks ago, there's a lot of similarities in semantics in terms of like the process of testing and the keywords and all that kind of stuff. So that's honestly pretty encouraging because that really happened by accident. So I think we will get there, and I think it is a useful framework. So we just need to figure out when we can prioritize it, and there's some work to be done to figure out what are kind of the critical pieces for the first couple milestones. Number 4, Bicep and Radius. So you might have seen an announcement for a new open source project called Radius that is coming out of the Azure Office of the CTO org. That's Mark Rusinovich's org. He has an incubations team. That's where projects like Kada and Dapper and a few others have come out of. So it's definitely an exciting project. They've been working on it for a decent chunk of time, and we've kind of been there since the beginning because they really wanted to take the dependency on Bicep early on. So we've been working with the Radius team for a while now, just iterating on what the Radius core principles are and how is that going to work with language services like ours and with Terraform. So it's been a pretty fun and interesting project to just be a part of, and it's really awesome to see it now be publicly available and we can talk about it. If you haven't seen anything, and we'll drop a link to a few things in the chat, it's essentially an app modeling ecosystem or specification, or I'm probably using words that they're not liking that I'm saying, but basically it helps you model your application in code with kind of richer semantics. So it understands what an application is. It's not just like a collection of resources. So definitely check it out, play around with it. I know the team is eager for feedback, and everything's kind of flexible right now in their world. What's interesting is it runs on top of a Kubernetes cluster. So Radius is not running inside of ARM. It's running the deployments engine, basically, in a Kubernetes cluster as a set of like operators and CRDs. And then you can write Bicep code that can be executed inside of that Kubernetes cluster to do whatever. One of the interesting things that they've done is they built an AWS provider for Bicep. It just only runs in that Kubernetes cluster environment. So there's a lot of like layering, and you kind of have to understand the details of what's talking to what, but you actually now can deploy AWS with Bicep in a specific set of conditions, which is kind of wild. And they took a dependency on the Cloud Control APIs, if you're familiar with that, from AWS, which is a really good foundation for generating good types and all sorts of other things. So this is a cool one. It's an incubations project, so we'll see where Radius goes over the next 3, 6, 12 months. And yeah, we'll see what happens. But it's nice. It's really nice to be able to talk about it publicly. And if I'm sure they would love to present in this community call. So if there's people that are interested in getting a deeper dive of Radius, particularly through the lens of Bicep, because you guys all know the language and the ecosystem so well, that could probably be pretty interesting. So I'm sure we can set that up if there's interest. It doesn't mean that there will be an AWS provider running inside of Azure for deploying AWS resources, but it certainly means that it's possible. So do with that information what you will. Number 5, there was a request essentially for within Azure Search, there's a set of data plane resources that are not in ARM. So the ask is really for a data plane provider or data plane resources support for Bicep for Azure Search. With new providers, we're taking them on a case-by-case basis. So we're focused on the graph provider right now. It is possible to add any provider in the future. So there just needs to be enough interest, and we would need to work in this case with the Azure Search team to see if there's interest from them in building and maintaining a provider. So that is something that we can continue to discuss. It might be worth creating a dedicated issue specifically for this so that we can, send them a link and ask what their interest is. And then number 6, there was a question about parent-child resource deployments and kind of the weird inconsistencies where what seems like a child resource is actually just a property on a parent resource, and updating those resources can get funky. There was actually a great answer, and I apologize, I don't remember the GitHub alias of the person who answered. So I'll see right now. Andreas Helland. So thank you for answering that, because that was pretty spot on with what's going on there. We really want the resource providers to be modeled in an ARM compliant way so you can avoid some of these challenges, but it doesn't always happen. So you're kind of in a tough spot at that point. For whatever it's worth, the VNet subnet 1 is actually getting close to being resolved. I believe they have deployed stuff in early test regions for fixing some of that behavior. So hopefully more teams will be on board with doing that going forward. That is everything. Anything that I missed or anything that people wanted to ask any follow-up questions about? Okay.
Is there any updates on the Azure AD provider testing?
In terms of like expanding the private preview or moving to public? Yeah. Stephanie, I think you probably have the best context on what their current plans are. Do you mind sharing if there's any updates?
Yes, sorry, can you re-ask the question, please?
Just wondering if there was any timelines or if they have been making progress towards moving to a public preview for, is it also going to change to a Entra ID provider now, or sticking to
Yes,
Azure
I
AD?
mean, yeah, still in private preview for a little while. I think they're going to be working on that for a few more months. It's going to be kind of slow progress when moving to public preview and GA, but we're definitely trying to speedline that.
Excellent, thanks.
And there's a question about issue 387, which is set or skip an object property based on a condition. I believe we actually did include that in our list. So we are hoping to get to that in this semester of work. I don't know if it'll be at the beginning half of the semester or the later half, but I do think we are going to close on the syntax and be able to hopefully knock this out in a reasonable amount of time.
There's a couple more questions. Thoughts on Azure DevOps provider?
It is also theoretically possible, and definitely could be something that I think it's fair to say it's on the short list, but nothing committed whatsoever at this point.
I think that's. Did I miss another question?
There's a question about the deployment scripts not deleting file shares. We are looking into it. I don't have an ETA at this point, but hopefully we can get you an update that has an ETA in the next couple days.
Okay. Any other questions? then we can end here for now. Thanks everyone for coming, and see you guys all next month. Bye everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.